Spain's youth unemployment crisis is often explained as a temporary economic weakness, yet the reality runs deeper into structural choices made over decades. After the global financial crisis and the Eurozone debt turmoil, Spain rebuilt growth through tourism, services, and flexible contracts, rather than long-term industrial employment. This created an economy where overall job numbers recovered, but stability for young workers did not. Many graduates rotate through temporary contracts, internships, and part-time roles that rarely lead to permanent positions. Employers prefer short-term hiring because labor rules historically made permanent contracts expensive to terminate, encouraging a dual labor market split between protected older workers and insecure newcomers. As a result, youth unemployment remains persistently higher than the European average, even during growth periods. Education outcomes also play a role. Spain produces strong university graduates, yet vocational pathways, linking training to industry, remain uneven compared to countries like Germany or the Netherlands. This mismatch leaves many young people overqualified for available roles, while companies struggle to fill technical positions. Regional differences deepen the problem. Areas dependent on seasonal tourism experience hiring spikes, followed by sudden layoffs, making career planning unpredictable. Housing costs in major cities further limit mobility, preventing young workers from relocating to better opportunities. The crisis, therefore, reflects incentives embedded within the system rather than individual failure. Spain is not simply lacking jobs, it is producing the wrong types of jobs for long-term stability. Understanding this distinction is essential because headline unemployment figures hide a deeper imbalance shaping an entire generation's economic future. What looks like recovery on paper hides a labor market structure that quietly traps young workers in cycles of instability, while expectations rise faster than opportunities, turning hope into pressure that defines how an entire generation views its future today, globally everywhere. To understand why Spain's youth unemployment remains stubbornly high, it is necessary to examine the structure of its labor market, which developed long before recent crises. Spain created strong protections for permanent workers during earlier decades, aiming to provide stability after periods of economic volatility. While these protections benefited older employees, they unintentionally discouraged companies from offering permanent contracts to younger hires. Instead, firms increasingly relied on temporary agreements that could be ended with minimal cost. Over time, this produced a dual system where insiders enjoyed security while newcomers faced constant uncertainty. Young workers often move between short contracts without accumulating experience that leads to long-term career growth. This pattern also affects wages. Temporary workers typically earn less and receive fewer training opportunities, reducing productivity and discouraging long-term investment by employers. When economic shocks occur, temporary employees are the first to lose jobs, causing youth unemployment rates to rise rapidly even when the broader economy remains stable. Reforms attempted to reduce this gap, but cultural and administrative inertia slowed change. Companies adapted their hiring strategies to navigate rules rather than transform them. Another factor is business structure. Spain has a high number of small firms that hesitate to take risks on permanent hires because financial buffers are limited. This reinforces short-term employment cycles. Compared to economies with larger industrial employers, Spain struggles to provide consistent entry points for young graduates. The result is a labor market that appears flexible but lacks pathways towards stability. Youth unemployment therefore reflects how incentives shape behavior rather than a lack of talent or ambition. Without structural balance between flexibility and security, reforms risk addressing symptoms rather than causes. The system protects stability for some workers, while quietly transferring risk onto the youngest generation entering the labor market today across regions and industries. Another major driver behind Spain's youth unemployment crisis is the structure of its education-to-work transition, which differs significantly from countries with lower youth joblessness. Spain expanded university education rapidly over recent decades, creating a generation with higher academic qualifications than ever before. While this improved access to knowledge, it also produced an imbalance between academic pathways and vocational training, linked directly to industry needs. Many graduates enter the labor market expecting professional roles, yet the economy generates a large share of positions in tourism, hospitality, and retail, sectors that often require fewer specialized skills and offer limited career progression. This mismatch leads to underemployment, where young people work below their qualification level or remain unemployed while searching for suitable opportunities. Apprenticeship systems, which in countries like Germany integrate students into companies early, developed more slowly in Spain and remain uneven across regions. Employers frequently report shortages of technical skills despite high graduate numbers, highlighting the disconnect between education policy and labor demand. Cultural expectations also influence choices. University degrees are often perceived as the primary route to success, discouraging vocational options that could lead to stable employment. When graduates face repeated temporary contracts or unpaid internships, frustration grows and confidence declines. This affects long-term productivity because workers who feel trapped in mismatched roles are less likely to invest in additional training or innovation. The result is a cycle where education expansion raises aspirations faster than the labor market evolves to meet them. Spain's challenge is not only creating jobs, but aligning training with realistic economic pathways. Without this alignment, youth unemployment remains structurally embedded even during periods of growth. When education promises mobility but the economy delivers instability, expectations become one of the hidden pressures, shaping an entire generation's future. Spain's heavy reliance on tourism and seasonal services adds another layer to the youth unemployment crisis, shaping how jobs are created and lost throughout the year. Tourism represents a significant share of Spain's economic activity, attracting millions of visitors and generating large volumes of employment during peak seasons. While this supports growth, it also creates instability because many roles exist only for limited periods. Young workers often enter the labor market through hospitality, retail, or entertainment jobs tied directly to seasonal demand. When tourist flows slow after summer or during economic downturns, these positions disappear quickly. This pattern prevents continuous skill development and interrupts income stability, making it difficult for young people to plan careers or build savings. Companies operating in seasonal industries rarely invest heavily in training because turnover is expected, reinforcing low productivity cycles. Regional economies that depend heavily on tourism face sharper fluctuations, leaving young residents with fewer alternatives when demand drops. Compared to manufacturing or technology sectors that provide year-round employment, tourism-driven growth offers limited long-term security. Policy efforts to diversify the economy have made progress, but structural dependence remains strong. The pandemic highlighted this vulnerability dramatically, as travel restrictions caused youth unemployment to surge faster than overall joblessness. Recovery brought many positions back, yet most retained their temporary nature. This reveals a deeper issue. Growth does not always translate into stability. Spain's service-oriented model generates opportunities, but often fails to create career ladders for younger generations. Without stronger diversification into industries that support continuous employment, youth unemployment remains sensitive to external shocks. The economy appears vibrant during peak seasons, yet underlying instability persists beneath the surface. An economy built on seasons creates cycles of hope and loss that shape how young workers view opportunity over time. Housing costs and geographic mobility quietly intensify Spain's youth unemployment crisis by limiting where young people can realistically pursue work opportunities. Major cities like Madrid and Barcelona concentrate higher paying jobs, especially in technology, finance, and international services. However, rising rents and limited affordable housing make relocation difficult for many young workers, particularly those starting with temporary contracts or low wages. Even when positions exist, the cost of moving can outweigh potential income gains. This creates a paradox where unemployment remains high in some regions, while vacancies persist in others. Spain's strong cultural ties to family homes also influence mobility. Many young adults continue living with parents longer than in other European countries, which provides financial support but can reduce flexibility in job searching. Regional infrastructure disparities further complicate movement. Smaller cities and rural areas often lack fast connections to economic centers, limiting access to daily commuting options. Employers in growth sectors struggle to attract talent willing or able to relocate under uncertain employment conditions. At the same time, tourism-driven regions experience temporary labor shortages during peak seasons but cannot offer long-term security. Housing, therefore, becomes more than a social issue. It directly shapes labor market outcomes. When mobility slows, mismatches between skills and jobs persist longer. This reduces productivity and prolongs unemployment spells for younger workers. Policy discussions frequently address housing affordability separately from employment, yet the two are deeply connected. Without accessible housing near stable job markets, youth unemployment becomes geographically locked in place. Spain's challenge is creating pathways that allow young workers to move toward opportunity without taking excessive financial risk. Until mobility improves, even strong economic growth struggles to translate into widespread employment gains for the younger generation. When movement becomes expensive, opportunity stops being about effort and starts being about location and access. Economic shocks have repeatedly amplified Spain's youth unemployment problem, revealing how fragile entry-level opportunities can be during downturns. The global financial crisis, followed by the Eurozone debt crisis and later the pandemic, hit sectors that employ large numbers of young people particularly hard. Construction collapsed after the housing bubble burst, eliminating pathways that previously absorbed many early career workers without university degrees. As credit tightened and public spending slowed, companies reduced hiring or shifted toward temporary contracts to limit risk. Young employees were often the first to be laid off because they lacked seniority protections. When recovery began, new jobs emerged slowly and were frequently short-term, preventing many from rebuilding stable careers. The pandemic exposed similar vulnerabilities in tourism and hospitality, where shutdowns erased seasonal employment almost overnight. Even as economies reopened, uncertainty encouraged cautious hiring behavior. Spain's recovery created new opportunities in digital services and renewable energy, yet these sectors require specialized skills not immediately accessible to all young job seekers. Repeated crises therefore created lasting scars, reducing confidence among both employers and workers. Companies became hesitant to commit to permanent hires, while young people delayed major life decisions, such as home ownership or family formation, due to uncertain income. This dynamic feeds back into the broader economy by weakening long-term consumption patterns. Unlike older workers who may have savings or established careers, younger individuals absorb the full impact of economic volatility. Spain's youth unemployment crisis is therefore not just about current policy choices, but about accumulated effects from multiple shocks layered over an already fragile system. Each downturn reinforced structural weaknesses rather than resolving them. Understanding this history explains why recovery alone does not solve the problem. Growth without resilience simply resets the cycle until the next disruption arrives. When every crisis targets the same generation, instability stops feeling temporary and begins shaping long-term expectations about work and security. Government reforms have attempted to address Spain's youth unemployment crisis, yet progress remains uneven because policy changes must navigate complex political and economic trade-offs. Labor reforms aimed at reducing temporary contracts and encouraging permanent hiring introduced incentives for companies to offer longer-term positions. Early data suggested some improvement, but deeper cultural and structural habits slowed transformation. Employers adapted by redesigning contracts rather than fundamentally changing hiring strategies, illustrating how incentives alone cannot reshape behavior quickly. Spain also invested heavily in European Union-funded recovery programs, focused on digitalization, green energy, and entrepreneurship. These initiatives created new opportunities, particularly in renewable energy and technology sectors, but scaling them across the entire labor market takes time. Regional governments play a significant role in implementation, leading to variation in outcomes depending on local priorities and administrative capacity. Training programs expanded to support reskilling, yet aligning education with employer demand remains challenging. Political debate further complicates reform. Some groups argue for stronger worker protections, while others emphasize flexibility to attract investment. Balancing these priorities is difficult in a democratic system, where consensus evolves slowly. Spain's experience highlights a broader reality. Solving youth unemployment requires coordination across housing, education, taxation, and industrial policy rather than isolated measures. Public expectations often focus on immediate results, but structural change unfolds gradually. Short-term improvements may not fully capture deeper shifts underway beneath the surface. The challenge for policymakers is maintaining momentum even when progress appears incremental. Without sustained commitment, reforms risk becoming temporary adjustments rather than lasting transformation. Spain's labor market is evolving, but the pace of change determines whether young workers feel real improvement or continued uncertainty. Success depends not only on new laws, but on how institutions and businesses interpret them over time. Policies can change quickly, but trust in a system rebuilds only when young workers see stability lasting beyond a single economic cycle. Another hidden layer of Spain's youth unemployment crisis is the psychological and social impact it creates over time, shaping how an entire generation approaches work and risk. Prolonged instability changes expectations. Many young Spaniards grow cautious about long-term commitments because income remains unpredictable. Entrepreneurship becomes less attractive when financial security feels distant, even though innovation could help diversify the economy. Surveys frequently show declining confidence and upward mobility among younger cohorts compared to older generations who entered the workforce during more stable periods. This shift influences productivity indirectly. Workers who expect short contracts may invest less in building specialized skills within a single company, while employers hesitate to invest heavily in training individuals who may leave quickly. The result is a feedback loop that keeps productivity growth modest. Mental health pressures also rise when unemployment persists, affecting motivation and long-term career planning. Spain has strong social support networks and family structures that help cushion hardship, but these networks can also delay independence by encouraging prolonged cohabitation with parents. While this reduces immediate poverty risks, it may slow economic dynamism by postponing consumption, housing formation, and entrepreneurial risk-taking. Cultural narratives around stability versus flexibility become central to public debate. Some view the labor market as overly rigid, others as excessively precarious. This tension shapes policy discussions, but also everyday decisions about education and career paths. Youth unemployment therefore extends beyond statistics. It reshapes attitudes toward the future itself. When a generation grows accustomed to instability, it influences political behavior, migration choices, and economic planning. Spain faces the challenge of restoring confidence alongside creating jobs, because without renewed optimism, even successful reforms may struggle to translate into sustained engagement from young workers. When uncertainty becomes normal, rebuilding hope requires more than growth figures. It requires visible pathways towards stability that feel achievable for everyday people. Migration trends provide another lens through which Spain's youth unemployment crisis becomes visible, revealing how labor market conditions shape long-term demographic patterns. During periods of high unemployment, many young Spaniards choose to work abroad, particularly in countries with stronger industrial bases, such as Germany, the Netherlands, or Ireland. This movement offers individuals opportunities for stable employment and skill development, yet it also creates challenges for Spain's domestic economy. When highly educated workers leave, the country loses part of the talent it invested in through education and public services. This brain drain slows innovation and reduces the pool of experienced professionals who could mentor future workers. At the same time, migration acts as a pressure valve that prevents unemployment from rising even higher domestically. Families often support these decisions, viewing international experience as a temporary solution, but not all migrants return. Some establish careers abroad, creating long-term demographic imbalances that affect population growth and regional development. Spain has also become a destination for migrants from other regions, helping fill gaps in agriculture, construction, and service sectors. This dual dynamic highlights how youth unemployment intersects with global labor flows. Opportunities exist, but they may not align geographically with where young Spaniards live. Policies aimed at encouraging return migration focus on improving job quality and career stability rather than simply increasing job numbers. Retaining talent requires creating conditions where young professionals believe their future can develop locally. The migration story therefore reflects both resilience and vulnerability. It shows that Spanish youth remain competitive internationally, yet domestic structures struggle to fully absorb their potential. Without sustained improvement in stable employment pathways, outward migration may continue shaping Spain's economic landscape for years to come. When opportunity exists elsewhere, the challenge shifts from creating jobs to creating reasons for a generation to stay and build their future at home. Ultimately, Spain's youth unemployment crisis is not a single problem waiting for a single solution, but a convergence of structural choices that accumulated over time. Labor market duality, education mismatches, seasonal industries, housing barriers, and repeated economic shocks combine to create a system where young workers carry a disproportionate share of risk. Spain is not alone in facing these challenges, yet the scale and persistence make its situation particularly visible across Europe. Progress is possible, and signs of improvement exist through labor reforms, EU recovery investments, and the expansion of renewable energy and digital sectors. However, meaningful change depends on aligning incentives across institutions, rather than relying on short-term growth alone. Youth unemployment falls sustainably only when stable career pathways expand alongside flexibility. Spain's experience highlights a broader lesson for modern economies. Recovery measured through GDP does not automatically translate into generational security. Structural stability requires coordination between housing policy, education systems, regional development, and industrial strategy. The conversation is shifting from whether Spain can create jobs to whether it can create the right kinds of jobs that allow young workers to plan futures confidently. This shift reflects growing recognition that economic health is not only about output, but about how opportunity is distributed over time. Spain's younger generation stands at a crossroads, shaped by forces beyond individual control, yet also influenced by reforms still unfolding. The outcome remains uncertain, but awareness of the deeper structure offers a clearer path forward. Real recovery begins not when unemployment falls temporarily, but when a generation finally feels that stability is becoming the norm rather than the exception shaping choices and expectations across society.